Hey, deep divers, welcome back. Today we're going deep on offshore wind farm transmission in the UK.
Oh yeah, those huge underwater cables that bring us all that nice clean energy.
Exactly. And get this, did you know that in the UK, those transmission projects are actually owned
Oh wow.
and operated by totally separate companies? We're talking billions of pounds changing hands here.
That sounds like a good deep dive then.
So our source material today comes straight from a webinar for potential bidders on this project called Dogger Bank B.
I've heard of that one.
Now, this isn't just any wind farm. It's the world's largest
Wow.
offshore wind farm, located 131 kilometers off the UK coast.
That's a long way out.
It is. Wait,
Yeah.
Kit, before we get into the specifics of Dogger Bank B, can you help us break down this whole OFTO thing? What does it stand for, and how does the system even work?
OFTO stands for Offshore Transmission Owner, so in the UK.
Okay.
Instead of the wind farm developers also owning and running the transmission lines, they actually sell them off to dedicated OFTOs through a competitive bidding process.
So it's like they're bringing in a specialist company just to build and maintain those underwater power lines.
Yeah, you could say that. And there's a good reason for this system. See, by keeping the wind farm development separate from the transmission, you actually encourage a lot more investment in these really complex projects.
That makes sense.
Plus, it allows companies with specific expertise in transmission to manage these assets, which should lead to better efficiency and hopefully lower costs in the long run.
So in theory, all this competition should actually lead to lower energy bills for, consumers like you and me.
Exactly. It's all about driving down costs and making sure renewable energy is as affordable as possible.
Now, this Dogger Bank D project sounds like it's attracting some pretty big players. Who are some of the companies in the running for this OFTO contract?
Oh, you're talking about major international companies here like Mitsubishi, Sumitomo, even Korea Electric Power. They're all throwing their hats in the ring.
Wow, that's a serious global competition.
It is.
But it's not just the energy giants, is it?
No, not at all. The webinar actually shows a pretty diverse group of attendees, including those big advisory firms, like PwC, EY. They all want a piece of the action, bringing their expertise to the table.
I bet.
There are even folks there from banks and financial institutions, which just goes to show how much money is really involved in all of this.
Speaking of money, can we talk about this tender revenue stream? I gotta admit, the first time I read about it, my head was spinning.
Oh yeah, the TRS, it can be a bit much.
Can you break it down for us without needing a finance degree to understand it?
Sure. Think of the tender revenue stream, the TRS, as a guaranteed income stream for the OFTO.
Okay.
It's like a steady paycheck linked to inflation, which can last for up to 25 years. This gives the winning bidder a lot of stability.
So no matter how much electricity the wind farm actually generates, the OFTO still gets paid.
That's right, their income is secured, which obviously makes these projects a lot more appealing to investors.
I can imagine.
It also helps ensure that the transmission system is well maintained because the OFTO has a real financial stake in making sure it's successful.
Makes sense, but there's got to be some performance standards involved, right? And they can't just, sit back and collect a paycheck without making sure everything's running smoothly.
Oh, absolutely. There are definitely standards.
Okay, good.
The target availability for the transmission system is actually a whopping 98%, which means it needs to be operational almost all the time, ready to transport that electricity.
Wow, that's pretty high.
There are bonuses for exceeding that target and penalties for falling short, to incentivize that OFTO to maintain a high level of performance.
So it's a system built on, accountability and performance.
You got it.
I like that. So for all that investment, for the winning bid, what do they actually get? What does that look like? I'm picturing more than just some cables in the water.
Oh, yeah, it's way more than that. You're talking about 174 kilometers of those undersea cables, a state-of-the-art offshore platform, a big onshore converter station, and even something called a landfall joint bay, where the cables transition from the sea to the land.
Wow, that's a lot.
That's a whole lot of infrastructure.
So it's like they're buying a mini power grid designed specifically to bring that clean energy to the shore.
Exactly. It's a massive responsibility, and the winner is going to have to prove that they can handle it, that they can manage and maintain those assets for the long haul.
For sure. You don't want to hand over such a crucial piece of infrastructure to just anyone.
Definitely not. Reliability is key when we're talking about delivering electricity to millions of homes. And speaking of the long haul, here's where Dogger Bank B gets really interesting. They're offering a 25-year maintenance contract for a symbolic £1.
Wait, a 25-year maintenance contract for a single pound? That sounds almost too good to be true. What's the catch?
It's all about minimizing risk and making sure they get a long-term partner.
Oh, I see.
By taking care of the maintenance, Dogger Bank B is essentially saying, hey, we want you to focus on just one thing, getting that clean energy to shore.
So it's a way to encourage bidders to really commit to the project and make sure that transmission system runs smoothly for its entire lifespan.
Exactly. It's a win-win. Dogger Bank B gets a dedicated partner, and the OFTO gets cost certainty, and that means lower cost for the consumer.
This Dogger Bank B project sounds like it's really pushing the boundaries of what's possible in offshore wind transmission.
It really is.
But before we dive even deeper into the specifics of this technology, I want to take a step back and ask, why should you, the listener, care about all of this?
That's a great question. The answer is pretty simple. This is your energy future we're talking about.
Oh, wow.
The success of these projects will directly impact how efficiently and, importantly, affordably that renewable energy gets to your home.
So this isn't just about some companies bidding on underwater cables. It's about building a sustainable energy system that works for everyone.
You got it. And as we move towards a net zero future, these large-scale offshore wind projects and the OFTOs that manage them are going to play a massive role in getting us there.
Now that we have a better understanding of the OFTO system, let's look a bit closer at the technology behind Dogger Bank B.
Okay.
They're using something called HVDC transmission, which sounds pretty high-tech to me.
It is. HVDC stands for High Voltage Direct Current, and it's a complete game changer for transmitting electricity over such long distances. But before we get into the technical stuff, let me ask you this. Have you ever noticed how a garden hose loses pressure the further you get from the tap?
Yeah, definitely. It's like the water just can't travel as effectively over a long distance.
Exactly. Well, it's kind of similar with electricity. That traditional AC transmission, it loses a lot of energy over long distances, just like a leaky hose, you know? Okay.
Yeah.
HVDC, on the other hand, it's way more efficient, which is especially important for those 131 kilometers from the wind farm back to the shore.
So it's like a super efficient power cable that just minimizes those energy losses.
Exactly. That means more of the clean energy generated by the wind farm actually makes it to your home.
Okay, so HVDC sounds pretty impressive, but I'm trying to picture this in my head, this massive wind farm way out at sea, and how they actually get the electricity onto these, super efficient cables. I'm guessing it's not as simple as just plugging in an extension cord.
You are correct. It's not that easy. That's where the offshore platform comes into play.
The offshore platform, the missing piece of the puzzle. Tell us more about it. What does it actually do?
The platform is where the magic happens. That's where they collect all the electricity generated by all those wind turbines and convert it to HVDC before sending it down those undersea cables. You could say it's like the heart of the transmission system, pumping all that clean energy to the shore.
I can just imagine it out there. It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
It kind of is.
And I bet it has to be pretty tough to handle those conditions out in the North Sea.
It does. It's built to withstand strong winds, high waves, and maybe even the odd, curious seagull. An incredible feat of engineering.
Okay, so we have this super tough platform converting all this electricity and these really efficient cables carrying it under the sea. But what happens when it gets to shore? Do they just, plug it straight into the national grid?
Not quite. See, the electricity coming from the platform is HVDC, but the national grid in the UK operates on AC, like most grids around the world.
Okay.
So we need another piece of this puzzle, and that is the onshore converter station.
Ah, this is where they make that switch from DC to AC, right?
Exactly. The onshore converter station has all this sophisticated equipment that transforms the HVDC electricity back into AC, so it's compatible with the national grid and ultimately with your house.
Wow. Starting to appreciate all the steps involved in getting that clean energy from the wind farm to our home.
It's quite a journey.
It is.
But every single element is crucial for making sure that renewable energy can be integrated into our existing energy system without any, hiccups.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of part one of our exploration into the world of offshore wind farm transmission and that fascinating world of OFTOs.
Time for a breather.
We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still so much more to discuss. Stay tuned for part two, where we'll go even deeper into the specifics of the Dogger Bank B project and take a broader look at the whole policy landscape surrounding OFTOs.
Looking forward to it.
We'll also be addressing that thought-provoking question we posed earlier. Could OFTOs actually be a good investment for your pension fund? Something to think about until we get back.
Lots to ponder.
Welcome back, deep divers. Let's jump right back into the Dogger Bank B project, exploring the tech behind it and the network of assets that make it all happen.
We were talking about how that electricity makes its way from the wind farm to the shore, and I think it's really worth highlighting just how crucial that onshore converter station is.
Yeah, it's not just a simple switch from DC to AC, right?
Yeah.
What makes it so special?
Well, the onshore converter station is where they actually transform that HVDC electricity from the offshore platform back into the AC electricity that powers everything in our homes.
Right.
And this conversion process, it involves some pretty advanced technology. It has to be managed really carefully to ensure that the electricity flows into the national grid smoothly and safely.
So it's like the final handshake between the wind farm and our houses, making sure the electricity comes in the right format.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And just like any handshake, it needs to be firm and reliable. Any hiccups in that conversion process could really disrupt the whole flow of electricity and could even lead to those blackouts.
So the stakes are pretty high for that onshore converter station.
They are.
What happens once the electricity is successfully converted to AC? Where does it go from there?
Well, from the converter station, the electricity is fed into the national grid, which is basically this massive network of power lines that go all over the country.
Yeah.
Think of it like a huge highway system, but for electricity.
A superhighway of energy. Yeah. So the electricity that's generated by Dogger Bank B, it joins this energy highway, and then it just makes its way to homes and businesses all over the UK.
Exactly. And it blends in with the electricity from all those other sources too, like solar, nuclear, even natural gas. That's the cool thing about the grid. It can balance supply and demand from all these different sources to make sure there's always a consistent flow of electricity.
Okay, so we've got this incredible journey of electricity from those wind turbines all the way to our plugs, but let's not forget about those 174 kilometers of undersea cables that connect that offshore platform to the shore.
Oh, for sure.
They're easy to overlook,
Yeah.
just sitting there under the waves,
Yeah.
but they're critical for this to work.
Oh, absolutely crucial. And they're not just lying there passively on the seabed either. Those cables are designed and engineered to withstand some seriously harsh conditions in the North Sea. We're talking about strong currents, shifting sandbanks, even fishing activities that could potentially damage them.
Yeah, I bet that happens a lot.
Yeah, so it's not as simple as just chucking some cables in the water and hoping for the best.
Right, got to think long term.
There's a lot of planning that goes into protecting those cables and making sure that they can operate reliably for decades to come.
Absolutely. It's got to be a balancing act between protecting the environment and making sure those cables are durable for the long haul.
It is. And don't forget, those cables are carrying high voltage electricity, so safety is really the top priority.
Okay, so we've talked about the platform, the cables, the onshore converter station. It's a pretty impressive network.
It is.
But let's shift gears back to the OFTO bidding process. What are some of the things that determine who wins that contract for Dogger Bank B?
Well, like we mentioned before, that tender revenue stream, the TRS, that plays a big part.
Right.
Bidders have to submit a bid outlining how much revenue they'll need to operate and maintain these assets over that 25-year contract period.
So it's kind of like the lower the bid, the better their chances of winning.
In theory, yeah. But it's not quite that straightforward. Ofgem, that's the UK's energy regulator, they're going to look at each bid really closely to make sure it's realistic and sustainable.
Yeah.
They'll also check out the bidder's experience, their technical capabilities, and how financially stable they are.
So it's kind of like a job interview. They're looking for the most qualified candidate that can give them the best bang for their buck.
Exactly. Ofgem wants to be absolutely certain that whoever wins this bid can handle the responsibility of operating this piece of national infrastructure.
Right. They can't just go with the lowest bid without checking their resume and their references.
It's a long-term commitment, and Ofgem needs to know that they're choosing an OFTO that will be a reliable partner for the next 25 years, maybe even longer.
They mentioned in the webinar about the possibility of extending those contracts, right?
Yeah, they did. One of the key takeaways was this idea of extending the lifespan of those OFTO assets. So right now, those contracts typically last for 25 years, but there's this growing idea that those assets could actually operate for much longer.
So the company that wins the Dogger Bank B OFTO bid could end up owning and operating that infrastructure for 30, 40, even 50 years.
It's definitely on the table. It would require some thorough assessments, of course, to make sure those assets are still safe and viable in the long term, but it could have a huge impact on how these projects are run financially.
And it would definitely make that 25-year maintenance contract from Dogger Bank be even more valuable, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It adds another layer of complexity to this whole bidding process because companies would need to factor in those potential extended lifespans when they're figuring out their bids. And it raises questions about, how these assets will be managed and maintained over such a long time.
It seems like these policy developments could really change the future of the OFTO market.
They could, yeah.
Are there any other policy things coming down the line that we should be aware of?
There was also some talk about how to better coordinate all these assets within the larger high-voltage network. It's like, recognizing that these OFTO projects, they don't exist in isolation. They're all part of this much bigger interconnected energy system.
So it's not enough to just build a transmission link from a wind farm to the shore. You got to think about how it fits into the bigger picture and how to optimize the energy flow across the entire system.
Exactly. And that takes a lot of coordination between all the different players involved, the OFTOs, the wind farm developers, and the national grid operator.
I bet.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but it's absolutely crucial to ensure the delivery of all that renewable energy is efficient and reliable.
So this is about more than just building wind farms and solar panels. It's about transforming the way we think about energy and how to make it work with everything we already have.
Absolutely. It's like a puzzle, but we're starting to figure out how all the pieces fit together. And as we keep moving towards a net zero future, these OFTOs are going to be even more important to make sure that transition is smooth and successful.
It's really amazing to see how it's all connected.
It is, isn't it?
From those wind turbines way out at sea to the lights in our homes.
It really is.
We've covered a lot of ground in this episode, from the tech side of HVDC transmission to the big policy decisions on the horizon. But before we wrap things up, I want to bring it back down to earth for a moment and ask, how will these OFTO projects affect people's lives?
That's the question, isn't it? It's easy to get lost in the technical details,
Yeah,
but this is about people.
definitely.
And for one thing, this project is a huge investment in the UK's economy. It's creating tons of jobs in the renewable energy sector, it's supporting those local communities, and it's pushing us towards a more sustainable future for everyone.
And we can't forget about the impact on those energy bills.
Yeah.
If transmission is more efficient, costs should go down for everyone.
Exactly. And that's huge. But there's also that wider societal impact to consider, For example, if this project goes well, it will help the UK rely less on fossil fuels. And that means cleaner air, a healthier environment, and we're one step closer to reaching those climate goals, which is good news for everyone.
It's mind-blowing to think that these massive projects, these cables hidden under the ocean, can have such a big impact on our lives and the future of the planet.
Yeah, it really shows how connected everything is, doesn't it? From the wind out at sea to the lights in our living rooms, it's all part of this one big system.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap up part 2 of our deep dive into offshore wind farm transmission.
Great discussion.
We'll be back for the final part where we'll tackle those ethical questions surrounding OFTOs and really explore if they could be a good investment for your pension fund. Don't miss it. All right, deep divers, we're back for the final part of our look at offshore wind farm transmission and those massive OFTO projects.
Time to wrap it all up.
We've gone from the very technical side with those HVDC cables all the way to those big policy changes that are happening. Now let's finally tackle that question about OFTOs and pension funds.
The big question.
Could they be a good fit for your pension? It's something that a lot of people might be thinking about, especially with everyone focusing more and more on sustainable investments.
It's definitely a hot topic.
On the surface, it kind of seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Long-term contracts, you've got that guaranteed income, and it's all tied to, clean energy. What's not to love?
It sounds pretty good, right? And that stable revenue stream, it's very attractive for those pension funds that need to make sure they're giving reliable returns for decades.
Yeah, decades.
And with, the whole world shifting towards renewables, offshore wind transmission just seems like a safe bet for the future.
It does, yeah. It seems like it ticks all the boxes, long-term growth, stability, but I'm sure there are some downsides, right? It can't all be sunshine and rainbows.
You're right. There are always things to consider. These are still pretty new assets, pretty complex too. And like with any investment, there's some risk involved. Like what happens if the technology, suddenly becomes outdated? What if the wind farm doesn't do as well as everyone thought? There are a lot of what ifs.
Yeah, a lot of unknowns. And those maintenance costs over such a long time, that must add up.
Oh, yeah, those costs can be significant. Pension funds have a duty to protect people's savings, so they have to be careful. They can't just jump into any investment without looking at the risks really carefully.
It's a lot of responsibility.
It is.
So it's not an easy answer. It depends on the project, the risk,
Yeah,
how the market is doing.
exactly. Every situation is different. But it's something worth talking about, for sure. As we move towards that clean energy future, these investments are going to be more and more important. And pension funds, they're in a unique position to actually support that change and potentially get good returns for their members.
Yeah, they can really make a difference.
They can.
And it's not always just about the money either. A lot of people want to know that their pension is going towards something positive, a more sustainable future.
Absolutely. Your investments, they reflect your values. And for a lot of people, supporting the growth of clean energy is a big part of that.
Okay, so deep divers, we've come to the end of our journey into the world of offshore wind farm transmission, those huge undersea cables, and that complex world of OFTOs. It's been a fascinating look at innovation, big investments, and a whole lot of moving parts. What are your final thoughts?
I think for me, it's really hit home how this whole energy transition is such a huge shift, It's not just about switching from dirty energy to clean energy. It's about changing the way we think about and use energy entirely.
Yeah, a complete system overhaul.
A system overhaul, exactly.
And with that comes big challenges, making sure those projects run smoothly, making sure everyone benefits, not just those big companies. But there are also huge opportunities here, new technology jobs, and a cleaner planet for everyone.
It's a journey with lots of bumps along the way, but we're all in this together.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Mm.
And with that, we'll leave you to think about what this energy revolution really means for you. Keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep. Until next time, stay curious.